That's legendary bassman Tony Levin and the title track from his new album, Bringing It Down to the Bass. Music fans who scour liner notes will know Tony's name from his work with Peter Gabriel, King Crimson, John Lennon, and Paul Simon, to name just a few. Over the years, Tony's made a lot of musical friends, and many of them, such as Robert Fripp, Steve Gadd, Jerry Marotta, Steve Hunter, and Larry Fass, can all be heard jamming with him on this new record. Tony and I have something in common. We both lived in Rochester, New York. While I was in high school, he was studying at the acclaimed Eastman School of Music, where he met another Rochester session legend, drummer Steve Gadd.
How lucky was I? I went in as a classical-only bass player, played some jazz, but not much, and Steve Gadd, the great drummer, was great then,
right?
In my same class, and he had really nobody to do gigs with him, and so I fell into playing gigs. He kind of quietly mentored my jazz playing and mentored me, and I became better. And I got the chance to play with Chuck Mangione and Gat Mangione, and there were a lot of great jazz players in Rochester, as well as classical.
Yeah. It's just because Rochester doesn't get notification, or isn't known for its kind of music.
Well, in jazz circles, it is, because the Cats, a lot of the Buffalo, Rochester area, a lot of the bebop horn players came from there. Great, not just Chuck Mangione, but Joe Romano, Sal
Well, that's
Nistico.
right. Yeah. All these names are coming back to me now. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, believe me, in the bebop world, they're still talked about plenty.
Oh, cool.
Levin Brothers toured in conjunction with Pat and Joe LaBarbera,
right. Oh, yeah.
Sax player and drummer from the area, and Pat LaBarbera, who has a huge history playing with Buddy Rich and with Elvin Jones, and so we discussed the greats from Rochester plenty, and they're still revered in the jazz world.
Yes. Yeah, very cool. I think the first concert I ever went to was in 1969 at the Eastman School.
Wow.
But it was Gary Puckett and the Union Gap. It wasn't anything cool.
Wow. Well, I was there in that I was living there, but I was not at that show.
Anyway, very good. So now you're bringing down to the bass. The new album is coming out. So what brought, because you got hundreds of things going on at the same time. Like with everything. Why this as well?
I'm very lucky to have a lot of touring to do. I tour with Peter Gabriel, with King Crimson. Oh, King Crimson has stopped touring now, but and a band of my own called Stickman and Levin Brothers, and that's what I love to do. But between tours, I'm home, and when I'm not playing on someone else's record, I like to write my own material, of course. So the last few years, the last 10 years, have been real busy for me, and a great problem to have. So I didn't have time to complete the, decide which pieces and just collate the album. And about a year ago, I decided if I don't carve out some time, it's never going to come out. It's just going to be always this thing I would have done, even though I have way more material than I want. So I devoted 2 years of this year, March and April, to say no to other things. It's not easy for me to say no to some playing on some other album. I said no to things. I finished it up. I chose the right 14 pieces for me out of the 25 or 30 that I had. And I feel good about the music. I think the main thing to me is not, even though it's based on the bass, and there's even a booklet with photos and little essays about my basses that are used on each track. The main thing to me is the other players I got. Instead of having one rhythm section the way I usually do for the whole album, each piece I just thought, what's the drummer I would most dream to have play on this? And I have such a long history with guys that I was able to get a lot of, really, in a way, it's biographical. I have revisiting with a lot of rhythm sections I played with, and I love that. And as I listen to the music many times since it's been recorded, the really special part to me is the players that I brought in for it.
Yep. Yeah, I noticed that the drummers in particular were the thing that moved around and seemed.
Yeah, and they're very well known. They're better known than I am. So I'm lucky to get these guys playing on my records. And
So what do you look for in the drummer to connect with the piece? Is that how it works, or are you just
in this case, that is how it worked, and I don't know the answer to that. I would have the piece pretty much done, or the composition of it. Maybe I didn't bring in the guitar player yet to improve on the rough guitar part I had done, and I would just the first piece is called Bringing It Down to the Bass, and I thought, well, it starts with just the bass with the kind of hammer-on technique, unusual technique. And I thought, okay, then the drums come in. And I thought, well, I wonder if it was Manu Katché, my good buddy that I toured with, Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what how is he going to come in? What would he do? And I thought, I'm going to give myself the gift of going to the studio with him and find out. While we were on tour with Peter Gabriel last year in Montreal, we went into a studio. I roped him into going to a studio, and the first take, he had listened to the song a lot. And in the first take, he came in again, and it just knocked me off my chair. I was in figuratively, I was in the control room, and I pushed. I'm not usually the producer in the control room. I'm usually the bass player. I pushed the thing, and I said, "That's it, Manu. Thank you." We've only been there 10, 15 minutes. I said, that's it. And we went into that arguing thing where he said, I got to do one more take. And I said, oh, but I'm going to use this take.
Yep.
And so we compromised. He did another take, but mostly I used the first take. But anyway, it's a gift. You can tell from my joy I have talking about it. I gave myself gifts like this on my album of players that knock my socks off, even though they're guys I know and they're good friends. And I could tell a lot of stories. Same with Steve Gadd, who I had play on a piece that has horns on it, and that's a piece called Espresso Ville that begins with my espresso machine, because Steve and I not only are old friends, but we have shared our love of coffee through the years, and that piece starts with a recording of my espresso machine and ends with that, and I actually looped the mechanical thing and it comes and goes through the piece.
And I think I read in the notes somewhere that was sent to me that you consider the album kind of audio biographical of sorts. Is that because of the people you're working with, or does the music kind of relate to that?
No, there weren't songs about it. It is, as I told you, about bringing those guys in. There's one piece called "Me and My Axe," where it's a rock ballad, and I wanted to play the melody on fretless, but I wanted to trade off the melody between the fretless bass and guitar. And a guy who has a beautiful singing guitar sound, one of the most beautiful I've ever worked with, is Steve Hunter, the Deacon, he's called. And we go way back to Peter Gabriel's first album and tour. And actually before that, we played on Alice Cooper records before, and I think Lou Reed.
Played with Lou Reed, yeah.
But I got Steve to do the melody on it, great. And I thought, well, gee, we're Peter Gabriel band alumni. Why don't I ask Larry Fast, the wonderful synth player from that first album and many albums after that with Peter Gabriel, to play synth on that track. And then Jerry Marotta, one of the drummers of Peter Gabriel in the early days. So biographical only in that sense. That's not what I had in mind when I wrote the piece, but as it developed, it ended up to be a chance to musically recombine with some old friends and make some good music.
So it seems to be kind of a secret club or a camaraderie among you guys who are in the background. Well, I mean, I know because I read the liner notes for everything and I memorize them. They're like, that's the Bible.
Yeah.
But for the most part, people know Peter Gabriel, they know Lou Reed, they won't know all the other names in that. So when you see each other, when you hang out, when you talk, is it feeling like you're in this club together?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word secret, but
Right.
good friends, some of whom are in contact. Some of these guys I'm in contact all the time. They're close friends for many years. Some I don't see for years at a time.
Yep.
And when you get to make music together, that's an additional, that doesn't affect, you don't need that to have a friendship, but it's an additional layer that's very profound, actually. So yeah, I love playing music with Jerry Marotta is a drummer, very close friend of mine for a long time, but we live near each other, so we play together all the time. We play on sessions. He'll just call me, hey, you doing anything today? I need a bass player. But whereas Larry Fast, I only get to play with every few years, but we communicate a lot. So
Right.
it's all of the above. It's not a secret club, but yeah, musicians have a lot of friends who are other musicians. And in addition, bass players and drummers have a bond because you're different instruments, but you're after the same thing when you're playing on somebody's record or you're playing a track. And when you're live, you're kind of bonded together every night, be in the rhythm section. So you get a very close bond in addition to being friends.
Gotcha. Now, speaking of autobiographical, you have a tune called Boston Rocks. You being from Boston and all, and Earl Slick on the record, which is pretty cool. So, how did you rope him into getting that?
I roped him in. I asked him, a good friend for a lot of years. Earl and I had played together with John Lennon first,
Right.
and then David Bowie on quite a few tracks. Yeah, and he rocks out. So I had this idea. I'm from Boston, and I had an idea to write a piece that describes the hard edge, kind of rough sports teams aspect of Boston, which is and by the way, I did a little vocal on it, shouting, not
Right.
Singing, but I brought back. Yeah, I was like, rock hard from Scully Square, because that's the way I talked when I was a kid.
Right, sure.
Yeah. So there's that, and I wanted to have that hard edge thing, and then I wanted to have the bridge be about the intellectual, historical side of Boston. A lot of universities there, and not hard edged at all. And I had a poem I had written about that, which I recite there. And okay, so to enact that, I thought, okay, I'm going to have Earl Slick not only play on it, but just rock out, because he does that so well, and no rules, and just go wild. And Mike Portnoy, my rhythm section buddy from Liquid Tension Experiment, he plays with Dream Theater. He was always willing, but he's so busy. It was tricky to rope into having time to play on it. But he played great on it. So it's a rocking out thing.
Yeah, it really kind of shifts gears, and it gets you think.
Yeah, big shift. I'm not afraid of shifting gears. I'm not worried about airplay and what genre is this going to be called. It's really, I think, heavy rock, but then it goes into this poem with a few quotes from JFK about Boston.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I had fun with it, and I musically did what I intended to do, and then I employed the musicians to best bring that to life, is the way I look at it.
You have Robert Fripp on a track on Floating in Dark Waters. He's an interesting character, and you've managed to stay on his good side for many years. How did you manage that?
It wasn't an effort. We met at Peter Gabriel's first album in 1976.
Right.
He asked me to play on his solo album shortly after that, and he asked me to join the band that became renamed as King Crimson.
Yep.
So we've had a great personal and musical relationship for, golly, I haven't done the math of how many years. There's a lot of mutual respect musically. That makes things easy. And also I learned, in a personal way, I learned early on the road with Robert that he has some rules. He has some things that he doesn't like to do that other people do, and vice versa. But he's consistent with them. So for instance, going back to the 80s, he'd be sitting at breakfast at the hotel, and maybe once or twice I came and joined him, and I learned that he didn't like that. He wanted to be alone. Okay, so that's Robert. So I didn't come for the next 30, 40 years on the road. I didn't join him with breakfast. I'd sit somewhere else, and he'd wave at me, and he's got headphones on, and he's doing business. So my point tonight isn't specifically what I said, but that if he has his rules about the way he wants to live his life, once I am comfortable with, I am comfortable. Once I understand that, then we're not intruding on each other.
Yep. Right. And what can you tell me about Floating in Dark Waters, the track that he contributes? It's a soundscape kind of thing, right?
It's a soundscape. Robert does these things called soundscapes, and he used to open King Crimson tour shows with them. He would compose it after sound check, and it would be playing when the audience came in. And sometimes he would ask me, as we're going on stage, we'd go on stage to the soundscape, then we'd tune, and it would come down, and we'd start the first piece. And sometimes on the way on stage, Robert would say, "Why don't you go on stage and just play to my soundscape, play bass to it," which I did. And then in doing my album years later, because Crimson has stopped touring, sadly, I thought, well, I emailed Robert. I said, "Do you mind if I just take one of your soundscapes? You don't have to write a new one. You get a million of them, and I'll play bass to it." I have kind of a bass idea with a very old specific bass that I have, the Steinberger bass. That was the first Steinberger bass that was made. And he said, "Sure, take one." And so I did, and it became called Floating in Dark Waters.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And he always comes across as a very serious, dour guy. But have you seen those videos that he's doing with his wife? That are the covers.
I'm a good friend of Toya's also.
Right.
I would put it this way: now the world understands the behind the scenes Robert that we knew about. I've been joking with him, even though King Crimson music is very serious.
Yeah.
The band itself always was laughing back, not always laughing, but a lot of joking around, even in the show in subtle ways, but off stage. And now the world has learned that Robert is not the uptight professor that they thought he was.
Yeah.
And I think it's fine. Do I watch those videos? Not really.
A couple of them is probably all you need, right?
Oh, I know them. They're my friends. So
yeah.
I don't need to see them.
So what initially drew you to the bass? Was there a moment, or was it a process?
That's a great question. I asked my parents that because I chose the bass when I was about 10 years old.
Right.
And I have done very little since then except for play the bass.
Right.
I got to say, no wonder I named my album that. I understand if I know anything, it's playing the bass. I asked my parents when they were quite elderly if I said anything, and they said they had asked me, and they said, "No, I just like the bass." And even though that sounds innocuous, after all these years, I think it says something. I didn't have a what do you call it? I didn't have a goal in mind. I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want to be in front of the stage. I just wanted to play the bass.
Right.
And that it's not silly because after all these years, I still just want to play the bass. I want to play good music. I don't want to play bad music, and I want to play with other good musicians. But it was evidently a decision from some deep, important part of myself, and I'm glad I didn't overthink it.
Yeah, and you didn't want to be Paul McCartney or John Entwistle or something like that?
Evidently. Well, they weren't them yet at that point, right. Way back, because I'm talking about 1956 when I was 10.
All right.
Probably when I started the bass. Yeah, I didn't want to play with Buddy Holly. And even though I love classical, my intention wasn't I'll get in the New York Philharmonic and that'll be great. I didn't have any intention except for playing the bass, and maybe I'm very lucky that I made that decision and that I had the support of parents to let me indulge in that.
That's very helpful, isn't it? They're helping and not hurting. But were you always practicing at home? Were they like,
that
down?
Yes and no. In my family, my parents believed that we should have part of an education was to have piano lessons when you're young. So both my brother Pete and I had to play piano. And you didn't practice enough. Tired of practicing. So I was made to practice piano. And when I played the bass, this was the instrument I wanted to play. So I did want to practice. And it wasn't an effort at all. Pretty big difference, actually. My brother Pete played French horn, and then he went back to piano and he did practice. So it's pretty different when you're made to do something and when you want to do something.
Okay. Yep. Now I've noticed that when you release this thing, there's a Blu-ray version, there's 5.1 and 7.1 mixes and all that stuff. Is that something that is a passion of yours? The sound atmosphere quality?
Good question. No, I'm aware of it, and the record company presented me those options. Most specifically, okay, you've done the mix. With the mix, I worked with Kevin Killen, the wonderful engineer who way back we formed the bass part on Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, a notable and kind of famous.
That is a notable one, yeah.
Yeah, and I've done a lot with him since, and I thought, well, he's the guy I got to bring in for this because it's about the bass and let's get great bass sounds. So working with him, I don't remember where I started this conversation, this answer.
Just about the different mixes and
yeah. So so we did the mixes and just focused on getting them right. Then the record company presented me the option of what are called Dolby Atmos mixes, a whole different thing that needs to be done in a different kind of studio. And I said, well, of course, I really think enough about this music that I would like it to be in the formats that work, that make it very high quality. So I'm not an expert at any of that, but yeah, I was involved in the mixes and they're what they are. And it's only on I guess a Blu-ray. I'm not technically that great. On a Blu-ray disc, you get all of those mixes, whereas on the CD, you get the one.
Yeah. And how much in general has technology affected the way you play in music, the stuff that you do in general over the years? Has it been a big factor?
Interesting. On bass, the bass sounds good, what's called direct in.
Yep, you just plug it into the console, right?
Yeah, but I go back to when analog effects were what there were, and I used plenty of them, especially in King Crimson. They had some drawbacks. They made a lot of noise. When they went digital, I jumped on that early, and I regretted it because the early digital ones had subtle ways they affected the sound that I didn't hear for 6 months or a year. But now I hear those recordings. Oh, geez, I wish I hadn't.
Yeah.
The same in photography. I'm very into photography, and in the same way, it was all analog. It was film, and then it became digital, and I jumped on digital too early. And my early digital photos are useless, and digital has become obviously very good and very good. I'm not going back to film.
Right.
I experiment with it sometimes, but pretty much not going back to film. But in the same way, interestingly, with my photographs, I found that I can do the same kind of processing visually that I do on my bass. Like through the years, I've learned to compress my bass a little. It affects the sound a little bit, and sometimes distort it. Well, now I'll see a certain picture and I'll take it and I'll think, okay, later I'm going to compress this or I'm going to distort it. It's a different thing. And I don't do that with every picture, but it's interesting how there's a parallel between what you can do digitally in those two worlds.
Yeah. And of course, being from Rochester, Kodak, I think, invented digital photography and then kind of tried to shoot it away.
I was just there and looking up at the Kodak building thinking, boy, times have changed a lot. Yeah. And by the way, the Beat Tour, when we play Rochester, we'll play at the Kodak Theater.
Oh, good. Yeah. And MXR was based in Rochester as well.
Indeed. That's one of the early pedals I jumped on. In the 80s King Crimson, the music we're playing now, I didn't do anything without the MXR phase 90 and the compressor. And now I could carry those two. I have the same two pedals, but it's way easier to just use digital version of it.
That was my first job going out of university, was working at MXR.
Good company. Yeah, great stuff.
And you'd build them. They were built like kits. So we'd do whatever it was, or whatever you'd cut the wires to the right length and throw all the components into a box, and then somebody would assemble them. It was the thing they had going.
Interesting. You probably don't know, but those pedals you were making then are worth a great deal of money now.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Not because they're better than anything that came since, but because they were the first.
Yeah,
they were at the beginning.
Yep. Okay, so once this, so what's next for you? Because I know you got the King Crimson based thing going on at the same time, and so how far ahead do you think? Do you still have to worry about like taking calls and going, oh geez?
I don't think much beyond tomorrow, but think or not, our plans revolve around some bands and some situations book way. If there were a Peter Gabriel tour going to happen next year, in the first half of the year, I would know about it by now. I wish there was, and there isn't.
Right.
The Beat Tour is 65 shows. That'll take me till Christmas. It'll be very all-encompassing. I'll hardly look up for that. Then I have a thing or two scheduled early in the year, and in March I will go with Stickman, a band that I devote a lot of time to. Stickman will tour Europe, yes, in March, and in April I have another tour that I can't really, if you talk about a tour that isn't booked in an interview that comes out later, you really look like an idiot when
Fair enough.
In April I'll probably have another tour. Beyond that, I don't know. Waiting to see what comes through.
You prefer touring or in the studio?
I prefer touring by a lot.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
All right.
Bringing our music to people and letting the music grow and sharing the music with the people. Hopefully the people who like it and people who are fans of it, that's the greatest.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 13th Floor's Music Talk series, please be sure to subscribe to the website or to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and wherever you find your podcasts. There's a whole lot more to discover.